Let's get nuts.
So we're started. And Miguel, thanks a million for joining us. How are you keeping?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah.
Trying to get by this summer, hot summer.
How hot is it over at you at the minute?
Well, I guess for you guys, it's been where I am in the Midwest, upper 80s, 90s Fahrenheit. So that's above average for us.
Yeah, we'd be getting kind of maybe, I suppose, to be in Fahrenheit at around 70s. So we kind of struggle with that over here. So if we were getting what you were getting, we'd be all thrown out on the ground.
Yeah, don't melt on me. Don't melt on me.
Yeah, so again, thanks a million for coming on. Funny enough, it was one of we only recently we did the last couple of weeks, started putting our episodes up on YouTube. And it was one of our subscribers actually recommended your work on your podcast. So your podcast is Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio. And started looking into it the last couple of weeks and really resonated with us for kind of topics that we covered so far. And funnily enough, so you've written a book at the moment called about the Occult Elvis, the mystical and magical life of the king. And I said it to Niall as well. Just everything was very funny, I thought, because I was over on a holiday in Lanzarote. When the subscriber mentioned your work, and funnily enough, the night before, we actually happened to be in a bar that had an Elvis impersonator. And so we went to watch him the following week after, and I actually wasn't aware about your book. I was only starting to look into your podcast. And then I seen, okay, he's wrote this book about Elvis. I said, whoa, the shrinkinicity there, that's kind of crazy. I suppose, starting off, you're obviously an Elvis fan, are you, yourself?
I wouldn't call myself one. I think it was sort of called to the book. I was never interested in Elvis most of my life. I'd heard about his esoteric side. I'd done some research on it, but I always considered myself a Beatles person. But sometimes, as John Lennon said, life happens when you're busy making other plans. And this voice came to me, this urge came to me to look at the life of Elvis, to fully look at the life of Elvis Presley. So it felt like a call from a friend telling me people have overlooked a big part of who I am, and it's time to really show it to the world. And so I went down that rabbit hole and wrote the book. Again, as I say, this is not hidden, if you would. It's not tabloid YouTube conspiracy material, because everything I grabbed from all the mainstream biographies, interviews with friends, family, from Priscilla and so forth. And it was my job to sort of collate all the supernatural powers of Elvis, his UFO encounters, his deep belief and practice of esoteric studies, and bring it all together in one book. And so here I am. I'm still, again, I don't know if I'm a fan. Of course, now these days, yes, I love to listen to his music, but I would say it's more of a favor to do to someone who needed help.
Brilliant. I suppose kind of like that term myself and Niall were talking about as well, and the whole idea of it, I suppose even the term Gnosticism. Could you explain to someone that might know what Gnosticism is? Because we didn't hear the term before we heard of it from your channel. And when we actually looked into what it meant, it was like, okay, we've come across these ideas before. So could you kind of break it down?
Ooh, that's a hard one. I'd say lock up your daughters first. Yeah, this is dangerous stuff, or at least most religions and secular governments have thought that throughout history. So, I mean, for your listeners, it's not hard when you couch it with cultural terms. I would say if you watch The Matrix, or even if you watch certain, even newer content like the series Westworld, or the show Severance, or if you read Philip K. Dick, or if you're into Carl Jung, you'll sort of gain an understanding of Gnosticism. It just basically posits it's an ancient way of inner knowing. And as a scholar Stephen Davis said, it's the story of how God became you and how to reverse it so that you can backtrack and become God. You've forgotten you were God. you mistakenly thought yourself you were human, and you began to worship these wrong gods. Gnosticism posits that we live in a sort of simulation, and that we have fallen into the simulation, and again, we've forgotten our celestial origins. And through the information, or as the Gnostics would say, gnosis, that direct salvific experience, we can recall who we are. And this information is usually brought about by a Gnostic luminary. I guess if you're looking at the Matrix, you would consider Morpheus, who hands out the red pills. And through the revelations and the mysteries of this Gnostic revealer, which not only provides the truth of where we are about the simulation, but the exercises for us to go into altered state of minds and remember who we are, we can awaken to the truth. We can collapse the simulation, understand that we've been trapped by these cosmic beings who the Gnostics often called archons, headed by the demiurge, who they associated with the God of the Hebrew Bible. And we can break through the simulation and again become whole, become individuated, and return to our celestial home. So that's sort of a short answer. There's, of course, many other features, reincarnation, a stressing of a divine feminine, and there are other features that we can talk about. But Gnosticism was, it hit its stride in early Christian times. Some have argued it's older, I would say so. And it's been sort of, it's been suppressed, even as it's manifested throughout history in the form of the Cathars, the Sufis, Kabbalists, and others.
Jesus, brilliant. That's a lot. When did you start getting interested into that field in yourself?
Well, I was always sort of a seeker, looking for the answers, the bigger questions of life, like Elvis was. I think that was his main drive in his life, try to understand who was God, what happens after death, and all that. So I was always interested in that. So I was always looking, but once I started studying the Gnostics, maybe 20 years ago, I found their answers more convincing, or at least, more convincing. I found their aesthetic something that I really liked, and I started studying them, and eventually started a podcast, because when you find something that works for you, that has brought you again your own awakening and so forth, you want to share it with the world. So it's been a while. I've been doing this for a while.
Yeah, because it is an idea, like, have you kind of heard of that idea before, Naylor?
Yeah. What was I going to say? I suppose my understanding of gnosis would be sort of the pursuit of secret knowledge that's going to help us understand our reality better, and maybe prevent us from being manipulated in certain ways.
Yeah, that's it.
So these archons, what's their end game?
Their end game is status quo. Their end game is to feed off of us. If we house, each human is a reflection of the supreme intelligence or consciousness or light. So therefore we house what the Gnostics would call the divine spark, the shard of eternity within us. So for these beings to sustain the universe, to the fuel of the universe, or again, going to the matrix, the electricity in our brains to keep the matrix going, they need to keep us trapped, and they need to keep us in the illusion, and that's what they do. And it's not, the illusion doesn't have to be negative, it can be a positive one. And that's really their end game, to make sure we don't wake up, to feed off of us, and so forth. I guess the original Gnostic tale, if you've read, is Plato's Cave, where we're all in one cave and all we see is shadows, and we think it's the real world, and someone goes up and sees the real sunlight and goes, oh my God, this is the better reality, and tries to go back down to help others escape. So that's the original Gnostic tale. The Gnostics actually had Plato's Republic in the Nag Hammadi library, the treasure trove of Gnostic scriptures that was found in Upper Egypt in 1945. And of course, they weren't just, the Gnostics weren't just making stuff up. writing fan fiction or something. This was really in the air. When you start to look at mythology and cultures like the Sumerian and the Anunnaki, the Persians and their idea of Ahriman gaining control of the world, the Book of Enoch with the Watchers and the Nephilim who have come over and taken over the world or are mismanaging the world, or the Greek stories where the gods are, they're not exactly very godly. And for example, and even Zeus, he makes Prometheus create mankind to be a slave. So these myths were in the air in many cultures across the world, and the Gnostics simply took it, and as the saying goes, they dialed it up to 11. It wasn't so much the gods or the spirits or the daemons were mismanaging the universe. It was like they were in complete control. They were creating the simulation, and we were in a simulation, which wasn't very popular in ancient times. In the East, it was, but here in the West, the idea that we were in some sort of illusion, manipulated illusion, didn't sit well with people. But it's, scientific today.
Yeah, like movies like The Matrix kind of have helped us to kind of wrap our heads around living in a simulation. Before a world of computers and that, it would have been difficult to explain to someone the idea of a simulation, I guess.
Yeah.
With these archons, though, they're not necessarily feeding off negative energy. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's become more popular today. The idea that they feed off of, as they say, the loosh. They feed off our pain and suffering. And you see that with more modern Gnostics like David Icke or John Lamb Lash. Yeah. But I think the classical Gnostics would say, no, they just feed off of us, period. If they need to use violence and fear to subjugate us, that's fine. If they need to use more positive things like our iPhones or television, that's fine. Whatever it takes. But ultimately, it's, again, more like the Matrix. They crave our divine spark, and that's what feeds or sustains the very universe itself.
Okay.
Is there a connection between them and UFOs, so and UAPs and NHI and all that?
It would so, yeah. I mean, scholars have noticed, like Eric Davis and others, that the Gnostics have this sci-fi sensibility because, again, when you look at their mythology, it does feel like we are under the control of these shadowy Lovecraftian beings who create our religions and our false gods in this world, and that they live in the stars and control the stars, and that our job is to take these astral out-of-body flights, go into an altered state of mind, which you see in the Gnostic rituals, and sort of fly and go to the final frontier. And their texts talk about going up to the stars and going through these star portals like Draco or whatever, and going into another dimension and making contact with, again, the supreme intelligence. So there is a Gnostic sci-fi sensibility to Gnosticism. So therefore, in our times, yes, many people have translated the archons into negative or hostile extraterrestrial beings, simply because, yeah, it does work. And of course, many authors and other famous people were doing that, like William Burroughs or Philip K. Dick and others, just switching the language. And again, David Icke, John Lamb Lash, and all that. Yeah, Gnosticism, I think, is very relevant today because it explains or is a proponent of the simulation theory, and also the idea of extraterrestrials and their war against humanity.
Do you think that the whole, I think you touched on it there a while ago, that it's kind of being suppressed, a lot of this Gnostic beliefs and stuff from the general public?
It always has been. I mean, the idea that we are, each of us is, as they say, a god in the becoming, that we don't really need any institutions to awaken. In fact, the institutions themselves were created to suppress us, whether it's our churches, our political systems, our very families, that everything's been created to keep us asleep, to keep us ignorant. As the Gospel of Philip says, the mother of all sins is ignorance. That's what evil is to the Gnostics. So this kind of anarchist, independent vibe, this idea that we can directly contact the God without intermediaries. Of course, the Gnostics would say, yeah, we all need a teacher, we all need a community, but we don't need these Baroque, solid structures of rules and laws and all to do it. We can do it ourselves. Needless to say, it didn't go very well for nascent churches and other institutions. And therefore, the Gnostics were, as you said, suppressed and often persecuted throughout history.
Mhm.
And the idea, too, that the creator of the universe is bad. I mean, that's not something most religions, even though in ancient times it was kind of known or accepted, as churches grew and religions like Islam grew and Christianity and Judaism, the idea that the creator of the universe was demented was not something they could allow. I mean, they had to, part of the PR is like, everything's going to be okay and this universe is great and don't worry about a thing, like kind of the meme, where the guy, everything's burning and he's like, everything is fine and all that. Kevin Bacon in Animal House, or the Naked Gun. So yeah, that's something that couldn't be allowed for in religious institutions.
So would you have any theories then as to how young guys starting out in rock and roll bands like the Rolling Stones and Led Zeppelin, the Beatles, and obviously Elvis, how did they come to this knowledge? And for the uninitiated, they're not going, we're going to be listening to these songs and singing along, but we don't know what we're really listening to. And I think you spoke about Elvis and his performances in Las Vegas, and it would only be people with a specialized interest that would have known what they're looking at, and the rest of the audience just see costumes. And do you have any theories as to how these young guys figured this stuff out?
Well, as I write in the book, rock music was always a form of shamanism. It was a fusion of African drums and African animism and the blues and the idea of the trickster and the devil, with the fusion of Pentecostal Christianity, which, say what you want, is a form of altered state. It almost, as scholars have noticed, it draws upon the ancient mystery schools, the idea of a God coming down and invading you and you going into an altered state of mind, except instead of Dionysus doing it, it was the Holy Spirit. That's what Pentecostalism was in the early 20th century. And these rock musicians like Elvis fused this together. And even early music critics, when they would go see Elvis or Little Richard or Johnny Cash, were like, this is a holy tent revival. This is a place where people go and they get together and they start going into altered states and dancing, and they're connecting with the shaman, and the shaman understands them, and they're going through a healing process. And we all do that. We've all been to concerts. We know that these artists really connect with us and they can help our healing. We're in a group, we create an egregore and all that. And we, again, it doesn't matter if it's the Grateful Dead or Taylor Swift or Jim Morrison. Rock music was really a spiritual modality, a sound modality, a healing form, especially an answer to post-war America, where this materialistic, imperialistic empire arose with mass media and all that. It was an answer to this. So it's always had that vibe. And I think those artists who can tap into that energy, that shamanistic energy, and connect with their audiences and help heal their audiences and help audiences understand themselves, have always been the most effective. And again, Jim Morrison, David Bowie, the Grateful Dead, all these acts really knew how to do that. And in culture, shamans are as much musicians and rock stars who dress up in gaudy feathers and costumes and dance. And, music is essential for shamanistic healing. And that's why rock music, again, it's this idea of, really dressing up, really singing, and always being transgressive. Shamanism was always on the edges of the tribe. It was always the one daring the tribe to understand each other and change. And therefore, rock music was always had this sort of transgressive, gender bending, rebellious attitude, which challenges the status quo and ask the status quo. We always need to evolve, we need to change, we need to look at ourselves. So in a way, that's rock music, whether it's Elvis with his Egyptian outfits, or David Bowie as a space alien, or punk rockers with their colorful mohawks. That's what rock music has always been, and it always will lean to the esoteric because it is transgressive, it is mystical. And Elvis started doing that in the early 50s. Again, things like Pentecostalism it was disliked by much of Christianity. They used to accuse it of mixing salvation and sex. The blues was even transgressive and disliked in Black culture because it was considered sinful and perverted and all that. And that's what musicians like Elvis did. And then later on in the 60s, Elvis was seeding this because he got into theosophy and Buddhism and Taoism in the late 50s, early 60s. And of course, he had the beat writers like William Burroughs and all that, bringing the East to the United States, alternative science. And then it just really exploded in the 60s, where alternative spirituality became just part and parcel of much of the big time rock music, whether it was the Rolling Stones adopted Satanism, or the Beatles adopting Hinduism, later on Led Zeppelin adopting Thelema, David Bowie adopting Kabbalah, and so forth.
Yes. From your research then, what do you think, what led Elvis to seek the occult and all these alternative spiritualities that you were talking about there?
Well, Elvis was always a curious soul. For various reasons. He was just born that way. He was also born with extra sensory abilities. He was able to see things he had that beyond the veil of reality. He was able to astral travel at a young age. He was able to do healing. And that's because he got this from his mother, Gladys. She had these abilities. We don't know why, witch blood or something like that. Oh, excuse me, guys. One sec.
No worries.
Got cats here. Crazy. They're attacking everything they move.
They're a bit peckish.
Oh yeah, of course they sleep all day until you hit the record button. They do that when I do. But what was I saying? Yeah, so he was born with these abilities, but he's also born with a curiosity. Remember, he was born in the Great Depression, bone-crunching poverty. He often went hungry at night. He was often homeless. The South was really bad during the Great Depression. And he went through a lot of tragedy. His twin brother, Jesse, died when he was born. There was a tornado that destroyed most of the town. One second. Oh, I gotta move this over here. There you go. That should stop the cats. Yeah, that tornado almost destroyed the town. Just a lot of tragedy. So he always was wondering about the bigger questions of life. Why did my twin brother die? Why were we so poor and suddenly I got rich? Later on, when he was young, his mother died when he was going into the army and so forth. And so this mixture of curiosity, special abilities, simply set him on a quest to understand, especially after he came back from the army and he started doing movies. He'd already conquered the rock music world. He was always richer. He was already richer than God, the most famous person in the world, but he felt completely empty. He felt like, I've reached the summit and I don't know what to do. What do I do with all of this? Why don't I feel whole? And in the early 60s, he met his spiritual teacher, Larry Geller, and then later on would meet Yogananda's successor, Dayamata, and he would be off to the races. He started studying again theosophy, Buddhism, Taoism, Gnosticism. He started practicing astrology, yoga, numerology. He went off to the races because he wanted to know, again, the bigger questions in life. He wanted to know, I have all this power. Can I use it for the betterment of humanity? Why did my twin brother die? What's the purpose of humanity? All those questions that we ask. And again, he went off to the races, and until the day he died, that was his main preoccupation. It was just as important as his career, as his family, and all that.
He kept this secret from the mainstream, did he?
Well, I would say he didn't he didn't hide it,
Yeah.
but he didn't broadcast it. It was more like, yeah, once in the early 60s, once he discovered the occult or the alternative, whatever you want to call it, he was open about it, especially in his inner circles and to friends. He would do meditation circles. He would talk to people about books he was reading. He would try to get into meditation sessions with friends and family and all that. And he drove everybody crazy because he really started to detach from the material world. He almost quit the music or the entertainment industry twice, once to become a Christian monk, once to become a Hindu monk. He started to become detached from Priscilla. Instead of having parties and football games with the Memphis Mafia, he would want to do prayers and discuss books. I mean, so he didn't hide it, but he wasn't actually going on the press or talking about it. It was just something he felt so passionate about it that he wanted to share with those who were around him, but he also drove people crazy. And a lot of people felt threatened because Elvis was sustaining basically an entire industry with the money he made. So it did become a threat, and eventually there was some pressure. He kind of, in the late 60s, he did go underground with it. He told everybody, like Priscilla and Colonel Parker and all that, all right, I'm going to focus on my career and my marriage. I'm going to be a good old boy. That was his weakness. If you could tell Elvis he was threatened, if you could get his idea of being a provider and a man, Elvis usually would balk the few times that you could convince him otherwise. So that was used against him, but he just went underground. And I think it actually started manifesting in his Elvis persona in the 60s and 70s. That's when he started to wear an ankh openly and in these outfits that were very occult, from Aztec calendars and so forth. And there were instances where he would stop in between songs and do a Tibetan prayer and other stuff. I think it just started manifesting in sort of a shamanistic expression on stage, although he was still studying, whether it was in his Vegas suite or at Graceland or even in a Hollywood studio in between takes. He was still studying the occult as much as he could.
Oh. There's actually a scene from, is it Baz Luhrmann, is it the director of the recent Elvis movie? But there's a scene earlier on where he's actually inside in a southern church, and black church, and it's like that. It's like he's being possessed, and that kind of shows that kind of idea. But I remember you were talking as well in one of your shows about MK Ultra, and that kids that were kind of like maybe, well, it's all theoretical, but kids that were actually taken for the project MK Ultra, that they kind of share similarities to the likes of Elvis, who went through trauma as kids. Do you think there's something there to maybe the ability that Elvis that you say might have had, or?
For sure. As I write in the book, I try to provide different angles and hypothesis for his rise and fall, whether it's from an alchemical point of view, Rudolf Steiner, Jungian, and so forth. But the shamanistic one is the one I like, and that's the idea that you get from various authors like Paul Levy, and that's the idea of the wounded healer. A shaman across cultures is usually picked by a child who has been broken, who has been severely wounded or traumatized. They either had a near-death experience or they have some disability. But as these cultures see somebody who's been broken has access to the spirit world, the channels of communication have been opened because the ego is so shattered, their persona is so shattered, and they have this ability. And due to this trauma, this wounded healer is able to access the spiritual world or the noetic world or the higher world, but also is able to really connect with others who might be in pain. And the wounded healer eventually becomes the shaman leading the tribe. And in a lot of cultures, the shaman does end up like a very sick and drug addicted person because of the weight of the energies, the wound that won't heal. The wounded healer feels that they can heal others or understand others, not despite their wounds or their trauma, but because of them. They often feel that if they do get healed, they might lose their ability to connect, to entertain, to heal others, or go into the spirit world. So that right there, and of course, you know, you see that in Stranger Things and MK Ultra. Children are closer to the source. They are closer to divinity. So it's a question of, you know, can you train them? Do you have to break them to open these doorways of perception and all that? And Elvis was certainly a wounded healer. Again, he was abused as a child, grew up in poverty, had tragedies happen to him, and he already had a natural ability for this magic, if you would, and this trauma sort of just increased it and gave him his powers. And perhaps that's why he never wanted to get better. And again, it's a tale as old as time, right? The tortured artist, whether it's Sylvia Plath or Jim Morrison, it's like, man, you can help me heal, but why can't you heal yourself? Yeah. It's like, well, I can't. If I do, I can't help you. So I'm going to, you know, burn out and fade away. But that's my job as a shaman.
Do you think he kind of reached out to, I suppose, shamans and all around the world maybe for advice into the later part of his life when he started to suffer and things like that and struggle with drugs?
No, I mean, he always said that if it hadn't been for the occult, he might have died a lot earlier. And that's what kept him going. Even towards the end, he was always meditating. Even on the day he died, he was meditating and contemplating and reading and so forth. But he never really reached out to anybody. It was his studies, his spiritual teaching, and all that. And I think he knew that his mission was over. As I write in the book, he pretty much predicted when he was going to die. He pretty much knew his mission was over, and he was fine with it. He knew this was my time. Again, he could astral travel. He had visions. He had no fear of death. He understood that the universe was this vast layered dimensional place with many karmic missions. So he knew it was good. He probably knew it was going to happen.
He thought someone as well was the week before he died that he was going, the next time he'd meet him would be on a higher plane.
Yeah, that's the story. Hold on. I know I got a dog barking.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah, I know. Like,
he's doing his job.
Exactly. It must be. It's the CIA coming to stop me from the MK Ultra mission.
Or being tapped. So.
Yeah. I might have to take drinks to my FBI van out there. But anyway, beyond. What was the question?
Trying to think.
You were just saying that he had spoken to someone the week before he died.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Meeting at a
house. Yeah, in the book, I give many reasons or hints of how Elvis was saying his time was up. But the most startling one was when 2 days before, it was August 14th, 1977, his stepbrother, David Stanley, came to talk to him, and Elvis was in bed, and his health was a mess. You know, Elvis had glaucoma and a lot of issues. So, but he's sitting there in his bed, it's strewn with all these books on spirituality. He's doing his work as always. And he tells his stepbrother, David, in 2 days, I'm going to be on a different plane. And David goes, oh, yeah, in 2 days, we've got a concert in Portland, Oregon. So you better not miss that plane. And Elvis is like, you're not getting it. It was always an issue when people around him were not interested in spirituality, just money and drugs and all that. But so Elvis rolls his eyes and says, here, I love you, gives him a hug, and that's it. And yeah, lo and behold, 2 days later, he was on a higher plane.
It's mad, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. You were saying before, it sounds wild to the average person, but that he had the ability to affect the weather. And when I heard you saying that, it was in another interview you done, and it reminded me of the story. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the men who stare at goats, and this kind of concept was kind of slipped into that book and into that movie. And I was just wondering, do you think that the powers that be, in terms of like the likes of the CIA and stuff, are studying this stuff as well?
Oh, for sure, for sure. I mean, there's, Project Stargate and all that. I mean, we've been doing remote viewing. We were doing remote viewing against the Soviets for years. They were doing it against us. It's effective. It's probably still going on. Yeah, I mean, some have said part of the CIA and these letter organization or whatever is to open portals to use man's innate telepathy and other abilities for their own uses, because it is real, it is scientific. I think parapsychology is well documented as being real and concise. So many studies and all that. So yeah, for sure. And I should mention too, with Elvis, again, all the instances of him manipulating the weather, making clouds move or stopping rain or moving objects or creating force fields. I always get instances where there were many witnesses. It's not like there was one person who said, one time with Elvis, he, shot a bolt of lightning or something. It was always, there were many people. He was there with Ginger Alden and her girlfriends. He was there with his Memphis Mafia. There were always people who saw it, and these have made it into biographies that have been around for 20 years from very mainstream people, friends, family. So it's all there, and it's all has a lot of witnesses, which is pretty startling. Even his 3 or 4 UFO encounters, he was never alone. He was always with family, friends. I mean, let's be real. The odds of Elvis being alone are like zero in his life. It was always had an entourage around him.
Yeah, and as well documented as all of that is, it's still not really accepted by the general public. Talk to the average person, and you can tell them this is documented, and they will just walk away or laugh about it.
It is. Perhaps that's been the frustrating thing about the occult Elvis, that the Elvis fandom is like they're like bah, 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 and they don't want to hear it.
Yeah,
even though it's in all these books, even though I've shown it in my book and it's well researched, again, many witnesses, it's obvious what Elvis was into, it's always what he experienced, but they have a view of Elvis, of this good old Southern boy, conservative Christian, and they don't want to let go of it. And we do with that with our great mythological figures. For example, whether it's King Arthur or Jesus or any figure, we see what we want to see. We have a certain image of that, and we don't want to see the truth. And part of Elvis's truth, an important one, is, again, the fact that he was a very complex, scholarly seeker, a mystic who had some incredible experiences that few people can ever go through.
Yeah, and you just mentioned there about his UFO sightings and stuff. Could you dig into that a little bit for us?
Well, Elvis was always into ufology, or he was very open to it, and he had a very sophisticated view. I mean, you have to consider in the 60s, people probably thought UFOs was little green men and combustion engines, right? But he thought of the whole idea that maybe they were interdimensional beings. Perhaps they seeded humanity. They had telepathic powers. I mean, he read a lot of the literature that he could back then. A lot of the, like von Daniken's Chariots of the Gods and so forth. So he was very sophisticated. People said he had a very sophisticated scholarly mind. He was very well read. I mean, he read thousands of books. You can find some of these occult books at Graceland right now or online. They're for sale, where he's annotating the books and writing commentary and all that, but very sophisticated view. But beyond that, he was an experiencer. He had 3, I'd say, traditional UFO experiences. One was in the Arizona desert, where he saw these lights moving in mind-defying fashion across the sky, and he and his spiritual advisor and members of the Memphis Mafia just sat there and stared at it, and these lights disappeared. Somebody said, could this be USA experimental craft? Elvis, who'd been in the Army and who was still connected to authority, said, no, we don't have anything like this. This is UFOs. He thought they were helping humanity from destroying itself from nuclear waste and so forth. So that was one. The other one was the traditional saucer experience, which he had in Graceland, and he had it with his father. And again, it was just they're outside and these flying saucers fly by. The third one was in his Bel Air home in L.A., where he was sitting outside with I think it was Red West, one of his bodyguards, and they're just sitting outside, and suddenly this light floods the area, the trees and everything. And at first they're like, well, maybe it's a helicopter, maybe it's an airplane. And then suddenly the light is just flooding everything, and there's no sound. And they're like, oh my God, this is not a helicopter or an airplane. And Elvis goes, go inside and get Jerry Schilling, his friend. And so Red West goes inside. They come outside and Elvis has disappeared. So, of course, they're like, oh, man, we had one job and now Elvis has been abducted by aliens. So the lights everywhere. They're running around screaming, Elvis, Elvis. And suddenly they hear a voice down the road, and Elvis is at the neighbor's yard just looking at the sky and the lights vanishing. And Elvis is like, this is really cool. So those are the three main ones that I show in the book.
Did he talk about those experiences a lot?
Not. What do you mean by a lot?
Well, because pre-internet, I'm about 10 years younger than yourself. I wouldn't have been too familiar with Elvis, but in the 90s, there would have been, I don't know if you want to call them conspiracy theories, but there were theories that, you know, people who didn't want to believe that Elvis was dead, that maybe he'd been abducted. And there was all these stories that you only get snippets. You can't look this stuff up because there's no internet. It's 1991, you know, that kind of way. But I remember there was ads. There was an ad, I can't remember, it was for a chocolate bar or something, and they were talking about how they'd met Elvis, and Elvis had been abducted by rock and roll loving aliens or something like that. But it's interesting that they can slip this thing into popular culture, and we kind of just go along with it. We don't really understand what we're hearing or listening to.
Yeah, I mean, once he died, he certainly reached these mythological levels that you see with very few people in history. He became a myth, a living myth that was appearing. But again, these are mostly, like you said, the tabloids and all that. And partly it's because, sometimes when such a popular figure dies, we can't accept it, again, whether it's Jesus or King Arthur or you name it. So we start creating myths and we start seeing things, or as I say in the book, I think that part of Elvis is still appearing and visiting this world in some way or another. That's how important he was and how powerful he was. I call him America's shaman, America's magician. Part of his essence and power is still coming. He really represents the American soul, and this soul can often manifest itself or appear it. But before he was certainly a conspiracy theory cottage industry before it was even popular like it is today. He was appearing in documentaries. He was appearing in, like you said, tabloids. And of course, his visitations continue today. You can go to the Graceland website, and they have one page dedicated to Elvis sightings. And again, he's appeared to so many people, and he still does, whether it's dreams, near-death experiences, or just appears to them. As I often joke, he should be in the Fortean Hall of Fame, or if you had a Mount Rushmore of, American famous figures that still appeared, you'd have like Jesus, the Virgin Mary, Bigfoot, and Elvis. How lofty is that? You've made it. You've made the Hall of Fame. You are mythical. You're part of the folklore. You're part of the collective consciousness. And these figures, I do think they are real in a way. They're coming to give us a message about who we are. I guess you can include UFO aliens on that Mount Rushmore too.
Mm-hmm. But I suppose the love that his fans have for him is kind of different as well. I don't know if there's anyone else that I can think of that people are actually building religious shrines to him.
Michael Jackson probably
would have shrines in their homes to him that would be like something you'd have for the Virgin Mary. They stepped out the Virgin Mary, and Elvis is their icon in a sense.
Yeah, and I mean, he's got a whole religion. Like you said, you guys saw an impersonator. Those are, hundreds of thousands of people do that every day and across the world. So, he certainly has reached this sort of mythic religious status that very few people in history ever attain. He's, in a way, he's more alive than ever. And as I say, his presence is still with us. So it's mind-boggling.
You've spoken as well. You said there's a lot of similarities between himself and the author Philip K. Dick.
Yeah, that was an interesting part that I didn't think I was going to run into. But yeah, I do provide a chapter paralleling Philip K. Dick and Elvis, because I wanted also to show what it was to be a seeker in those times, because they only had the information they had that we don't have today, and how their worldviews were created, and how both Philip K. Dick and Elvis Presley really changed history, and their mystic views were an essential part of it. They seem to be very different. Famous rock star versus this sort of a niche sci-fi writer who only became famous after his death. But there's so many parallels. I mean, Philip K. Dick also lost his twin, Jane, when he was born. And he always said that was the biggest driving force behind everything he wrote, whether it was Total Recall or The Man in the High Castle. It doesn't matter. Jane was what fueled him. And it was the same with Elvis. Losing Jesse is what really fueled him and became the biggest passion in his life. He wanted to understand why this had happened. And with both Jane and Jesse, it became a sort of they became voices in their heads, their higher selves, their consciousness. They would appear in their dreams, that would guide them through life and so forth. So I have all these parallels. And again, Philip K. Dick also had UFO experience. He had mystic abilities. Like Elvis, he was very eclectic and syncretic, and joining all this occult and Christianity ideas together into the stew that he used for his worldview and so forth. And both again had issues with pills, they had issues with drugs. Both again were wounded healers, abused as children, and they died very young too. Both had, of course, issues with connecting with people, workaholics. And again, there is this phenomenon called the twinless survivor. When somebody loses a twin at birth, they have this survivor's guilt, where they think, why did I live? What happened to my twin? What's going on? And they tend to be very creative, seeking people. You have others like Liberace and others, and they're very incredible, talented artists, but they tend to be workaholics, prone to addiction, and have issues connecting with other people, especially the opposite sex. So the parallels of Dick and Elvis are a lot, and I wanted to show this sort of snapshot of these two individuals that were so similar, and what it was to be an occultist or somebody into alternative science, religion back in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. And there's a lot of parallels. For example, there's this sort of curse that both Philip K. Dick and Elvis had, where they thought that street drugs were bad. Like, they both denounced it, and they were both, for Nixon's war on drugs, losing friends, and these street drugs are killing us, and damn, the 60s revolution went wrong. But they had no problem taking pills, because they thought, well, if a doctor prescribes it, it's gotta be fine. And that was a horrible trap that they got into. But that was the mindset in those days. It wasn't their fault. So I wanted to show how the mindset was, and how, we always have to be careful, because we always think something's great, but then we realize it wasn't so good after all. And the pills and those things, ultimately really hurt their health and their lives.
You said as well that Elvis, how did he view the afterlife?
He thought he was a proponent of reincarnation. I think logically he came to it at a young age. He just thought it was just logical, and he thought that all of us evolve through time and space, perhaps in other dimensions. He thought, we were all responsible for our evolution. So some people will eventually reincarnate and go to heaven or whatever, nirvana. But some will, keep choosing a materialistic, empty life, and eventually will dissolve or fall into some sort of damnation. It's, It's your choice. That's it. That's how, and there are spirits guiding us. So that really was his view of the afterlife. Just keep coming back and keep doing well. And he was very influenced by Eastern traditions and Gnosticism and the idea of levels of being and different incarnations and so forth.
Kind of going into the conspiratorial side of it, right? So I don't know, are you aware of like Travis Scott's concert there was back in 2021, and there was this whole thing like that he was, I suppose, using it as a ritual to kind of, I don't know, benefit himself through contact with interdimensional beings, something like that. Do you think that there's something to that and what other artists today and out through the ages have done?
I would say so, yeah. I think, they know that instinctively that these concerts create egregores or thought forms of energy, and they can open portals, at the very least positive portals, to connect, to bring down power. B, they've been compromised, and of course these rituals always need some loosh or sacrifice to open these portals. The most classic one is, I don't bring it up in the Elvis book, but in the David Bowie book I'm working on, is of course the Altamont Festival. And that's, even Don McLean wrote about it in his song American Pie. It's all right there. And you've got this festival, you've got the Rolling Stones, who are Satanists, you've got Mick Jagger with this, again, Elvis-esque, very Baroque suit. He's hands open. You've got the Hell's Angels down there on stage, the fallen angels, and they're stabbing this woman. George Lucas was the cameraman. So all that just stinks of a satanic ritual. Yeah. And you wonder, did they know? Was it unconscious? Were forces using them? That you can debate that all day, but yeah, you start realizing that these symbols and powers are used for rituals. And of course, we know, as the old saying goes, millionaires don't do astrology, billionaires do astrology, because they know these primordial symbols and rituals and powers do work. They do work to gain power, to gain immortality, to summon things. And they've been using this all the time, whether it's in music rituals or advertisements or even space rocket rituals. It's all, yeah, it's a ritual to work with the archons or surpass the archons and all that. And it certainly, I would say, happens in the music industry a lot.
That's brilliant. Miguel, just we got into a whole lot there.
We could talk to you all day, but we're about to be escorted out by security.
Yeah.
No, I understand.
Thanks a million for coming on. And look, just your books are available online wherever people can buy books, Amazon, I suppose, and different sites. And your podcast is, I know some people pronounce it Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio. You can find it wherever you find your podcasts. And some of your books there, we're going to post them up on the website for the description, or sorry, on our podcast for description as well. Really enjoyed that. Thanks a million, Miguel, again for coming on. And hopefully down the line, if you'd be up for it, we get you on again.
Sure, no problem. Enjoyed it. Thanks.
It's brilliant. And I hope you get through the hot weather now and feed the cats, will you?
Yeah, I hope the cats go to sleep, because I'm sure as soon as you hit the non-record button, they'll like fall asleep.
I don't know. Thanks a million. Miguel, right. Thanks a million. All the best. Have a good day for yourself.
Take care, guys.